Welcome back, everyone, to the special edition of Question Period, our Look Ahead program, where we talk about the key events of the year ahead in 2021. We all hope it'll, end the pandemic, and, we'll end the great pandemic and we'll begin the great recovery. There'll be many challenges and tensions still, though, outside of that, right? We haven't talked much about tensions with China. Canada keeps escalating those as the two Michaels remain locked in a Chinese prison. We should never forget that. There's a new U.S. president, Joe Biden. Will he become a Buy American president? Will the environment and the new price on carbon the Liberals announced at the end of 2021 define the year? What about issues like systemic racism or reconciliation? What about resource development? Will those reemerge as top of the agenda? Or is the spring election going to be what we all likely think, a referendum on handling the pandemic and the recovery? To look ahead at some of these defining issues, we are joined again by Bob Fife from the Globe and Mail, Joyce Napier from CTV, Tonda MacCharles from the Toronto Star, and our special guest is the former NDP leader and now the CTV News commentator, Tom Mulcair. Happy New Year, Tom. Good to have you join our scrum. We're just asking you to predict what the biggest issues of the year will be, Tom. No big challenge here, but there's a lot on there. Obviously, the pandemic and the economic recovery, which we've spoken a lot about, are going to be key. But what other issues are you watching for to emerge, Tom?
I think that we're looking at an election in 2021. If you look at the history of these things, average length of a minority government in Canada is about 18 months. You have to go back almost 50 years to when Pierre Trudeau lost his majority in 72, came roaring back in 74 and got his majority again, a big one. How did he do that? Well, he hugged the NDP like an anaconda. He was very friendly with David Lewis, gave them all sorts of stuff. You want Petro-Canada? Sure, we'll have a Canadian, government-owned petroleum company. Why not? What else do you want, David? But what he did as he headed into the election is he said, well, we're such good friends with the NDP. Why bother voting for them? That's one of the biggest challenges Mr. Singh's going to have, and I think that Mr. Trudeau and the people around him know that history very well. They're repeating it. Mr. Singh has propped up Mr. Trudeau any number of times. He is going to be the one, Mr. Trudeau, to decide when the election's going to be held. It's not going to be the Bloc Québécois and the Conservatives and the NDP ganging up on the government. Mr. Trudeau is going to be in charge of that. And anytime we can get past the worst of the second wave, probably late spring, early summer, be attentive. You might see him walking across the lawn at Rideau Hall from Rideau Cottage to go knock on the door and ask for a writ from Governor General Julie Payette.
Well, the first viral expression, Bob Fife, of the year, hugged like an anaconda. I think the NDP is going to be haunted by that one. Bob, you spent a lot of time covering China and foreign affairs. On that file, again, the two Michaels, let's not forget about them. They're still in prison. On that file, what are you watching for?
Well, the government still has to make a decision on whether it's going to ban Huawei from Canada's 5G network. We're the only Five Eyes country. In fact, other allies who are not members of Five Eyes have already done so. There's countries like Australia and the United States are realizing that they have to get a lot tougher with China. They're setting up foreign registries, so we know if former politicians and senior bureaucrats are working for Chinese state-owned enterprises, do we need to be part of China's Asian Development Bank? We particularly need, I think, a much stronger policy in terms of foreign investment review of Chinese takeovers of Canadian companies. At the same time, we have to trade with China. And so we need to do what President-elect Biden is doing, which is building an international coalition of Western democracies to take on China. And the other issue, just leaving aside of China, of course, is climate change. And President-elect Biden is going to be an ally of Trudeau and Germany and Europe, who realize that this is the most important issue facing our generation, is how do we deal with global warming.
All right, so we got hugging like anacondas and we got taming tigers when it comes to China. Tonda, what are you looking for?
Well, just when it comes to China, I think actually the government has tacitly decided that they're not pressed to make a decision on Huawei because all the big telecoms in Canada have already excluded Huawei from building out their 5G network. They've all made that decision, and essentially that lets the government off the hook, which gives them a little bit still maneuvering room in terms of trying to safeguard the safety of the two Michaels that are in that prison in China, in Beijing and in Dandong. So I think Bob's right. Building that international coalition is the way to go, but it's going to be a lot easier when you've got bigger countries like the U.S. and Australia with its bigger trade ties with China on side. So I think those two things open a path for the Trudeau government in terms of what is basically the biggest foreign policy issue facing it. Don't forget, we've got the issue of the national security law in Hong Kong and the issue of the Uyghur minority in the northwest province in China. Those are massive human rights issues that challenge the world and the world's defenders of human rights to stand up and do something.
Joyce.
Yes, Australia showed its muscles, and look at what's happening to Australia's exports of Australian wine to China. So, you know, China has a very good knack of punishing those who, you know, sort of irritate it. And Canada has been a constant irritant to China and has not been able to fight back. We can't fight back on China until there is this international coalition. And every single member of this fictitious international coalition each have too much interest in keeping China, yes, far away, but close at the same time.
Okay, let me, at this time last year, Tom Mulcair, you know, and in January, it was two issues dominated, and I wonder if they're going to come back. It was the Wet'suwet'en and the pipeline issue. Resource development, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. How could those two issues shape 2021?
They're always going to remain important. Resource development is, of course, essential to our society. We've talked a bit about the Biden administration. They're saying that they're going to put up barriers at their border to stop countries that are not respecting the Paris Accord from coming in. This just in, that makes life easier for Mr. Trudeau with his bold and ambitious climate plan, because he gets to tell people out west, look, this is what's happening. We can no longer not be part of the solution internationally. But inherent in all of that is the respect for the treaty rights and the inherent rights of our First Peoples. And there's an opportunity here to right many of the wrongs of the past, because there will be a massive transition. You can imagine that wind energy and hydrogen and some of the tools of the future are going to be able to be developed in those regions where we have large concentrations of First Nations, Inuit, Métis people. So the government can see it as an opportunity. They do have one knock on their record, which is their consistent refusal to obey several rulings of the Canadian Human Rights Commission with regard to Indigenous youth on reserve. They've called it racial discrimination, and Mr. Trudeau is sincere when he says it's the most important relationship, but he's actually got to start acting on that.
Okay, a quick whip around to end this one. Tonda, I'm going to start with you. There's a lot of issues we've covered over this program. You know, if there's an election, at this moment, what do you think the defining ballot box question is going to be? I'll just do a quick whip around. Ballot box question, so you think, for 2021?
Because the crisis of 2020 will still be so fresh in everyone's minds and we'll still be living it in 2021 for much of it, I think, who do you trust to handle a crisis? Who do you trust to handle a health and economic crisis? And I think that's the defining question.
Joyce.
Pandemic for sure, and vaccines, and absolutely, that will be the ballot question. Even if it's at the end of the year, that's going to be the ballot question for sure.
Tom Mulcair.
Sustainable prosperity will be the Liberal pitch versus what they will describe as conservative austerity. Mr. O'Toole's going to have a hard time fighting away from that.
Interesting, and I wonder, we didn't mention, deficits could be part of that. Bob Fife, what's your ballot box question of 2021 so far?
Well, it's going to be the economy. So many people are out of work, so many small businesses are closed down. Which party will have a solution that people will buy into? And of course, the vaccine. Are we going to, will the population be, most people will have the vaccine hopefully before the summer, and they don't have to wait until the fall.
Yeah, often wartime leaders don't get elected because a wartime leader is different than a build back leader. So, you know, we move from the great pandemic to the great recovery. Maybe that's the ballot box question. All right, I got to thank all of you. Bob Fife, Tonda MacCharles, Joyce Napier, Tom Mulcair. It's going to be a busy year. I want to thank all our special guests. Thanks so much.